It's the cry of generation. It's a stirring in our soul. It's dreams still in focus. It's hope still whole. For children that are and those who will be, our destiny is justice for once, for all, forever. Let it be. No more delays, denials can ignore our voices, nor suppress our choices. We come for all that God has gave, unashamed descendants of the indigenous immigrants and the once enslaved. For children that are and all those who will be, our destiny is justice for once, for all, forever. Let it be. Liberation when we read, love when we lead, moving at the speed of student needs, pushing against the abundance of oppressive greed. For children that are and all those who will be, our destiny is justice for once, for all, forever. Let it be. It's an honor for me to sit here with Representative Jennifer Bacon, Assistant Majority Leader now in the Colorado House of Representatives, and another justice warrior. As we consider those folks who we're interviewing are people I consider justice warriors, and you fought for justice and still continue to fight for justice on so many fronts, specifically in the area of education. And so, before we dive in, I want folks to just tell folks who you are, a little bit about who you are, as how you got here a little bit, your pathway here.
Yeah, well, Jennifer Bacon, like bacon and eggs. It's okay.
We love bacon.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Everything's better with bacon. No.
That's right.
I currently represent Colorado's House District number 7 in the legislature, in the state legislature. I have the privilege of serving as the assistant majority leader there. And the committees I'm on are Judiciary and Education, which are very fitting for me given my professional background and my interest in supporting community.
Yeah.
So out of college, started as a teacher, jumped back and forth in a classroom or a school, and I also went to law school. But I became a teacher and attorney for the same reason, and that is to be an instrument for our community to help us actualize our greatness in our power. And so I found my way to Denver chasing a job. Once upon a time, there was a president named Barack Obama, and all things were right in the world, right?
Yeah.
But apparently there was a recession, so I couldn't keep that job because of hiring freezes, and I just never left Denver.
Yeah.
And so that was 2010. Denver's probably been the place I've lived the longest outside of being raised in South Florida. So I find myself in this seat because I've also only lived in one neighborhood as long as I've been in Denver and in Colorado, and that is 80239, that is Montbello.
Yeah.
And I really just love my neighborhood, and I do want to be of utmost service to them. And so since Denver has taken me in as a non-native Coloradan, I want to do my part to support Denverites, but in particular, Black community, Black and Brown community.
Yeah, we appreciate you. And 80239, that's where it's at.
Leadership.
Right.
Okay.
Jim, what sparked your push for justice? And you think back to you growing up, like you said, South Florida. What sparked it? I know I've heard some of the stories, some of the experiences you had down there.
Yeah.
What sparked you saying, nah, I don't like the way the world is, I'm going to work for something different?
It was probably middle or high school.
Okay.
I can't remember if I knew this at the time when I was a kid, or if this is like one of the things I've built up as I've grown up. But South Florida was super interesting, and I think all the time frame and the place was really interesting to me.
Yeah.
So my parents are from literally the center of everything civil rights movement, right? My mom's from Jackson, Mississippi. My dad was from the south side of Chicago. They were growing into being Black professionals in the world, and so we kind of saw how that was going with them. My mom's generation, my mom never went to school with white children. She went to HBC, so she never, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
South Florida was very multicultural and multi-ethnic, but very South and still racist. So I have early memories of my mom being like, we can't live in this city because the Klan lives there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Plus everybody speaking Spanish. It was just very interesting,
Yeah.
But I think my own educational journey was also you can tell that I'm speaking to you. I spoke just like this in first grade. So I was what we call very loquacious and had to sit next to the teacher's desk all the time.
Right.
And I remember my mom fighting for me, and particularly fighting that I was the only black kid that could be gifted, that, talking didn't mean you were bad,
Right.
those types of things too.
Right.
And by the time I was in middle school, we were in the burbs, and it was very white. There were like literally 4 or 5 black people, and we had to build our own networks. We did all the things. We did all the bougies, all the, we Jack and Jill and NAACP
Yeah.
and Urban League and like, street ministry.
Right.
We just went in. My
Right.
dad, did jail ministry,
Yeah.
right? We just did all the things to find black community.
Right.
By the time I was in 7th grade, I remember, thank God, and this is probably what stuck to me for me being a teacher, that I had a black assistant principal at my middle school, because I was called the N-word. Kids would walk around wearing shirts. I still remember it, like with a Confederate flag. You wear your X, I'll wear mine, in reference to Malcolm X in the 90s, and
Yeah.
Denzel had done the movie. It was
Right.
the whole thing. And I remember having to also do the Black History Month presentation.
Yeah.
So I was very aware that I was black
Yeah.
in middle school. And by the time we got to high school, my mom was like, we're gonna find you another school.
Mm.
So interestingly, I'm very familiar with school choice,
Yeah.
although it was no charter school.
Right.
South Florida had magnets, and the way South Florida wanted to integrate public schools, because it was segregated, Florida's the South,
Yeah.
was to put magnet programs in the hood and have kids from the burbs
Come
go
to
there.
mind.
So I went to a very black Afro-Caribbean high school, and it was like night and day from my middle school, even though I had an academic program. I'm an IB kid.
Yeah.
So it's like a black IB kid in a black school getting on a bus going from the burbs into, my high school neighborhood, and you could just see and feel how differently we were treated. Even in my high school, it was like, where are you going? Like,
Right.
we had sheriffs.
Right.
Like this school, metal detectors, I knew. We had all of that.
Right.
And I knew for a fact schools 5 minutes down the street didn't have those things. We didn't have books in our library.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I was like, let me figure out what this is. And I became a tutor, and I was a student tutor all through college. That led me, I majored in politics and business, because that's what a nice suburban kid does.
Yeah.
But I could not be pulled from education just to help our kids understand what they're up against in the world.
Yeah.
And even with that, I still became a teacher.
And your
You know,
journey,
so-
your journey led you into the classroom, but then you did this crazy thing, and you ran for school board in Denver.
Sorry.
We appreciate you for it, right? And you saw some of the same injustices that you lived in South Florida were still systemic injustices in this new place that you were calling home.
Yeah.
And you then had this opportunity to address some of those systemic things as a board member. How was that journey?
I mean, the only reason I ran was because so much was happening in schools in our neighborhood. And I was doing school to prison pipeline work, and I found myself doing a lot of explaining. I'm like, this is why you're tested. This is why they're shutting down the school. This is why they don't think we ain't fill in the blank. And I think that's why I ran. And it occurred to me, it was people these are man-made experiences. This isn't the sun also rises and black people feel disenfranchised. We are not genetically coded.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
To have less resources. And it just occurred to me that people were making these decisions. And there were people that either had no idea what our experience was or didn't value our experience. And that was not okay to me. And I had the privilege, because it was a real privilege, of running for school board. Parents are the kids' first educators and best educators. They got to go make some money. It's not like they can't be on school board, but I, didn't have kids. I had the time and space to go run for this position, but I had to be an instrument. I couldn't do it just for me,
Yeah.
And
When you got on there, what were these systemic injustices that, I don't want to say surprised you, because we live it, right? We live these realities. But when you got on the school board and you saw data, I mean, we had an interview earlier today talking about the Bailey Report, 2016, right? Before that, those who know history, 1995, the 21-year gap between Dr. Bailey's, first, this is her, when she was on the board, this
Right.
was her first evaluation of things, and she comes back in 2016 and says, hey, y'all, ain't much changed.
Right.
And here you are on the board dealing with the realities. She said, ain't much changed.
Right.
what did you do with that? What I mean, we can get to the Black Excellence resolutions that
Yeah.
you helped to. You know, I mean, we're talking about the reunification of Montbello these
Yeah.
days because of work that you saw that was that's not just.
You know, I was interviewed for the Bailey Report. I was kind of like a black educator at the time. And the injustices that I saw were just like the belittling of our potential. You know? Everybody wanted to figure out, it was interesting because it felt the landscape felt very savior complexy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we have been facing inequality in education forever. Our 20% of kids on grade level does not match who I believe we are. But everyone wanted to talk about that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And that was the injustice of it all.
Right.
We are, at our core, excellent people. We are brilliant.
Yeah.
And we're trapped in a system that doesn't want to recognize that, or people kind of like build whole careers off of that.
Right.
And that, I just felt like we were being used and not supported given the promises that were made, not only to our community, but like the promise of this country. I just didn't want to believe America and all these things were a lie.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so, yeah.
That's heavy, right? I mean, you look at this though, Jenny. You say, well, who in that moment in those spaces where you're on the school board and you're on, who are these? Who are the term ally comes up? Who are those that were true allies to say these things have been going on too long, and justice delayed is justice denied, right? How long do we get to continue to delay these things and not own the fact that we're actually denying justice for Black, brown, poor kids in our city? And who's held accountable for that? Is that, is that the board? Is that a mayor? Is that who's taking accountability for the denials of the justice that we both believe is necessary for kids to thrive?
I think the decision makers, especially, schools are very local government. I think there was a lot of state stuff happening with what was driving the conversation. What was driving the conversation, school performance and tests and money. But I do think that the people who are elected to address this issue, which is school boards to some extent, city council, mayor, and the legislature, are responsible for it, especially if we live in this social contract of a world that we will have rules, regulations, laws that we'll abide by, or that will measure us, you know what I mean, or fund us. And so, in regards to allies, I've always thought that Colorado and Denver had a particular problem. Like, look, I come up through the South, like the Florida, Louisiana, Virginia here. In some ways, it's easier to work there because the bigotry is clear. You know what I mean? Like, we know how they feel, and you know what you're up against. Here, I think a lot of people want to do the right thing, but the challenge is ownership of what that thing is. And all of those elected officials believe like they got the best answer. And the challenge for me is, because it's both for me, like I am an elected official, but the challenge for me has always been like, who's driving this conversation? Which leads me back to the savior piece. You know what I mean? Like, so in a lot of ways here, this is not a city that you got to explain what equity and equality is, but everyone feels like they know better than you about what it is. Does that make sense? Especially our communities, and it's a really tough conversation to have with people.
As an elected representative, you like I said, school board, then you chose to go into the House. What is it that you are championing now? And there's a lot of things you championed that are going to ensure that we are not tranquilized by gradualism, but we are actually realizing justice in our lifetime. I think we've heard from our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, oh, hang in there, one day we'll get there. And I think there's this frustration, like, why do we keep saying one day we'll get there when there are other folks who are living abundantly, who are living without some of the constraints and the pains and the struggles? When do we say, as an elected leader, we're doing this to cause this transformation that should have been when America wrote The Promise?
You know, white supremacy is real. I think there's been a movement of late to make the face of white supremacy like a Klansman or a neo-Nazi. And that's not, people think racism only comes in those forms. And people are afraid to hear the terms racism and white supremacy. And to me, they're not so much indictments as they are like awareness. Black people, we can have a word for 2 minutes before people want to undo it. We said Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. We said, whoa, weak. We said affirmative action. Wait, like we can't have anything because of how uncomfortable it makes the status quo, which is white culture. In order for us to get to the one day, we have to recognize and say what happened in the past is unacceptable and that it does come with guilt. Everybody should feel guilty about slavery.
Yeah.
But we can't even, I just got a text 2 minutes ago about having to go to a school board meeting who doesn't want to approve AP African American history because it makes them uncomfortable. They don't want to be labeled as having done wrong. Well, what was right about slavery?
Right, yeah, right.
You know what I mean? And all of this is about a culture of comfort. And it's so striking how America seems to be the last, even Canada had a whole reconciliation program with First Nation and Indigenous. But people will never, that's the thing, like, will America ever acknowledge it? Because they're afraid of reparations. They're afraid that their money would have to go to the people who it was stolen from. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's so interesting of like my generation's challenge. My mother graduated from a segregated high school. It's not 100 years ago.
Right.
She's still alive.
Right.
James Meredith, who desegregated Ole Miss and brought the first lawsuit to end segregation, is still alive.
Yes.
So in his lifetime, he has seen affirmative action come and go. Because white people are uncomfortable with having kids of color being prioritized. And it makes me sound like, oh, are you a crazy black woman? I'm like, no, that's just the fact of it.
Right.
When you intentionally put people in a hole for 400 years, just stopping the practice doesn't get them out of it. You have to be intentional in filling that hole in and pulling them out. And that's what we talked a lot about with Losing Ground, with Dr. Bailey. All of these programs that we have done to right that wrong and remedy it, it's what's being challenged today.
Right.
And being undone by the Supreme Court because of comfort. It means my kid doesn't go to college.
Right.
They're like, you just got in because you're black. I'm like, okay, and how many people got in just because they were white?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, young people.
Like, I mean, it's, you
I think
gotta
you
fix
hit
it.
Yeah, I think you hit a real thing about this comfort. When we said we work with young people, when you come and talk with the young people that we work with, they really feel like this educational system is not achieving justice because we placate or we bend to the adults in the system.
Yeah.
And we do not remember that the system is supposed to be designed, carried out, delivered for the good of children. Children's futures hang in the balance.
Yeah.
And it feels like a lot of times what we do is adults have bargaining rooms and adults get their outcome that makes them comfortable. But kids get to live and survive in uncomfortable educational systems. How do we change that at the state level? How do we change it at the local level?
It is, at the end of the day, this is people work. And we have to say and declare that you're not making change unless you are uncomfortable. System is designed to protect itself and to make things to where you are privileged, right? System is a tool of maintaining privilege, and the privilege is the comfort. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it's fascinating, the potential, right? It matters who's in these seats. We had a 26-year-old come to the legislature and he blew everything up. This kid.
Yeah.
But I was okay with the discomfort,
Yeah.
It was hard. There were some things that were very difficult conversations.
Right.
But there's something about youth culture, that's the tension between youth culture and adult culture, right? The change.
Yes.
Not either side doesn't know everything.
Yeah.
There are things, I still tell kids, maybe you shouldn't drive 90 miles an hour.
Right.
Some of us experience that.
Right.
But it doesn't mean we can't understand what it is that they need, because to your point, these systems are for them.
Right.
And so I think, part of me is like, what does it mean to have young people in decision-making spaces where we can share the responsibility, where we can respect the wisdom and maturity, but be innovative?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Justice, I love what you resonate with me. There's justice in the discomfort. And I think because we have chosen to be comfortable, all of us to some degree have a comfort that may be keeping us from
Right.
operating in ways of justice. But I hear you loud and clear saying, look, if we want justice, we have to become uncomfortable.
Why are we comforted by 20% of kids being on grade level?
Right.
That's what bothers me. But
Yeah.
like, why are you okay with this?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. What?
Who does this serve?
Right. How are we? Who does it serve being comfortable with the
That you wouldn't want to
mediocrity?
move faster,
Right.
or question yourselves,
Right.
or ask us what kind of money we're spending,
Right.
and also what is it that we've learned as well that our best practice, to be sure we don't run off a cliff to serve your interest in
Right.
solving this as
Right.
well. And that to me has been Denver K-12 for the last 15 years.
One of your former colleagues, and we will end on this because I know we want to honor your time. She said that justice is optimism, and if we lose, we have to be optimistic that it can be realized. Do you agree that it requires that? And if so, what is optimism in action? Because I think we've heard all of these, for years now, Dr. King would say, we've heard these words, wait. We've heard all of this rhetoric. We've heard all of the beautiful
Maybe don't
stuff.
do it that way.
Yeah.
You can protest, but don't make any of them mad.
Right.
Yeah, that's
What is justice that is very optimistic, that still believes that it can be realized? What does it look like to you? And yeah, that's it. What does it look like to you?
I do think like the way optimism connects with the uncomfort, it's because, for me, justice is dealing with the discomfort, but it's not staying there per se, right? It is about recognizing as a motivation to do better, and that's the optimism piece, right?
Yeah.
To do better. But to me, justice, particularly in the K-12 space and for African Americans, if you've never been to the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, it's at the Lorraine Motel where Dr. King was assassinated. There is these phrases on your way out, and it says, what do we want? And one of them says, we want the right to determine our own fate.
Yes.
And to me, that's what justice is, that we realize we are not empowered. We have a power.
That's right.
Right? That we know our worth and we can actualize our power and get to a place where we feel like we are in better control of our fate and outcome, where we don't have to, where we can individually and collectively be free of these systems.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oftentimes I see Black culture rebelling against itself because they don't want to be labeled with the negative, and they would turn their back on the collective. And while we are not a monolith as a Black community, we are collectively linked, having been othered and being labeled Black, right? And so that has done something to us. But if we realize that we all have to be in this together because it was all put on us together, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Regardless of our interests, then we can get to a place where we're taking ourselves free of this. At the end of the day, like I said, the things that we experience and have othered us were man-made systems and ideas.
Right.
It can't, like some people were like, you can only sit in the back.
Right.
Some people said, not God,
Right.
not nature. Some people said, I don't want you walking through the front door, which means people can undo that and people can be deliberate, you know what I mean, in remedying that. But years and years of that have led to culture, so we need people who are willing to be uncomfortable, who know all of our potential, and willing to make the hard decisions to reset our culture.
Yeah. Well, Rebecca, thank you. Thank you for leading. Thank you for coming here. Thank you for continuing to push for justice.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
God bless us all.
God bless us all. Go get it. Thank you for joining us this week on the Justice Cast. If you are moved and inspired by what you heard this week, we need you to do justice by doing 3 things. Number 1, like and share this episode with your friends and family and network. Number 2, sign and share the Do Justice Pledge. And 3, join us for an upcoming Do Justice action. You can find those listed on our website at www.faithbridgeco.org. That's www.faithbridgeco.org. Remember, the world we believe for is possible. Do justice.
Thank you to House Assistant Majority Leader Jennifer Bacon for being our guest this week. Thank you to our funders and sponsors. Join us next week when Vernon sits down with APS Superintendent Michael Giles.